Greetings, greenhouse people. Today we're celebrating a birthday. And no, I'm not going to sing, I will spare you that. But we are talking about a lot of plants, industry evolution, leadership, milestones, and a whole lot more. This is going to be a two-part episode, and that means you get to hear this intro twice. If you're like me, learning the backstory of successful and iconic companies is always interesting and gives insight into the business and industry as a whole. Companies that survive and thrive for decades are nimble enough to maneuver trends and fads, but consistent and focused enough to chart a thoughtful and successful course amidst constant change. This is certainly the case with PanAmerican Seed, who's celebrating a 75th anniversary and making innovative moves to grow for decades to come. This is an action-packed episode of the Tech on Demand podcast brought to you by GrowerTalks, where our goal is always to bring you tips, tricks, and information to produce your best crop ever and make product decisions to improve your quality and bottom line. Be sure to subscribe to the Tech on Demand podcast on your favorite podcast app like iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Odyssey, and more, so you'll never miss an episode. In part one of this podcast, the topics at hand include industry history, corporate leadership, overcoming horticultural obstacles, and the importance of reliability. Those might sound pretty broad, but these dynamics are super critical when applied to the horticultural industry. They're topics that impact us all. And there'll be plenty of personal stories mixed in, making this one of the most interesting podcasts I've had the pleasure of hosting. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and I'm very excited to be joined by Anne Leventry, the president of PanAmerican Seed. Anne's a member of the Ball Executive Committee and the Board of Directors, and as I said, the president of PanAmerican Seed Company, the seed breeding and product division of Ball that has the industry-leading market share for ornamental plants worldwide. Anne's been with Ball since 1987, and as you'll hear in this podcast, has seen a lot of changes, industry growth, and various trends. Interestingly, she started her career in the mental health profession and worked in several public mental health institutions in Pennsylvania before joining Ball as a human resource specialist, holding different positions in HR until becoming managing director of European operations and now president of PanAmerican Seed. She received a BS in psychology from the University of Pittsburgh and an MA in clinical psychology from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and an MA in industrial relations from St. Francis University. Anne's married and lives in Naperville, Illinois. She loves to travel and learn about other cultures and the nature and wildlife in other parts of the world. She's also a board member of Metropolitan Family Services of DuPage County and a board member of the Chicago Botanic Garden. Anne, welcome to the Tech on Demand podcast.
Hi, Bill. Very nice to be here.
For sure. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Anne, and also to have worked with you at Ball for, I guess, more than 15 years that I've been there. And throughout those years, I've always admired your leadership and your sense of strategy when it comes to new products and business. And it's really it's going to be a pleasure to do this podcast. And really, since I have you trapped on a podcast recording, there is something I do want to know before we get into the topic. And that's, how exactly did you get started in horticulture? It's a question I like to ask people frequently. It's kind of a roundabout path, or the answer kind of comes as a surprise. So how'd you get started in horticulture?
Yeah, well, thanks for the introduction, Bill. And I also just want to say before we begin that it's been a pleasure for me to know and work with you all these years as well. You've had different roles in the company, and it's been nice to see you move around and try different things. So, yes, I also have a weird kind of pathway to get into the industry and to get into my current job. I started out whenever I was in high school. I wanted to be a psychologist. I just had my mind made up, and I went to school and I got a bachelor's degree in psychology. I then went on and got a master's degree in it. So I was very committed to it. And I actually worked in the field for 5 years in two different cities, in two different places of work. And I just found out it wasn't for me. It was just not a good fit for me for a variety of reasons. And right around that time, my husband was transferred to the Chicago area, and I was very eager to come because I thought it's a pretty big job market. And I decided to look for something in human resources, thinking, well, that would combine my interest in people. And then, I had also decided to go back to school and got a degree in industrial relations, sort of business management. I thought it might be a good combination of those two things. And so I actually was hired at Ball in human resources, and I worked a whole variety of roles for about 10 years in different roles in human resources. And for part of that time, I was the human resource manager of PanAmerican Seed. And so I got to really know the company very well and a lot of our locations and people. And I really loved that company. I really loved what we do, and just the nature of the breeding and the production. And so after about 10 years, I had the opportunity to move into more of a general management role, and I've been in this role ever since. So yeah, it's been a really good journey, and I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity to do it.
That's really interesting. You started on the people side and then moved into the plant side. I think in our industry you hear the opposite a lot, and I frequently make the joke that plant people aren't always people. But that's really neat that you started on the human resources side, and then I'm sure have taken a lot of those skills into management of a company like Pan American Seed, which is full of people doing important things with plants. So that's really interesting. I love that story, and I think that'll lead well into our discussion about the evolution of Pan American Seed as we celebrate a 75th anniversary of the company. Um, let's shift gears directly into Pan American as we talk about this milestone, because 75 years really is a long time for a company to be in business, especially in our industry where dynamics change and there's been a lot of consolidation and change in the industry at large over all the years. Yet Pan American Seed continues to innovate and meet all sorts of needs of the industry, even after 75 years. So, can you talk a little bit about the company? And I know it's tough to distill 75 years down into one talking point in a conversation, but can you talk a little bit about the timeline in a few minutes, just to give the listeners a sense of how the company has changed over that 75-year time period?
Sure. So the company was founded in 1947, and it was an independent company. I read a little bit of history about it because a few years ago, Ball celebrated their 100-year anniversary as an overall corporation, and they did a history book at that time. And there's a big chunk about Pan American in there. There's quite a bit of history. And it was founded in Colorado, and there were three gentlemen who were involved with it. I don't think they all had the exact same ownership, but there were three different men involved with it. One of whom was Charlie Weddle. And over time, they sort of split off into different roles. And one of the other men was Claude Hope, who had founded a big farm in Costa Rica where he was producing seed for a variety of flower companies. And so Ball actually bought the breeding entity of that group in 1962. So that's how long the Ball Corporation has owned it. And that was the portion that Charlie Weddle had taken ownership and responsibility for. And so it was a very small company at that time, just a handful of products. They did all their production was done Linda Vista by Claude Hope's company. Once it was purchased by Ball, it was made a separate division of PanAmerican Seed, and then in 1981. The corporation bought Linda Vista as well. So that's really the genesis of the whole company, because I always describe PanAmerican Seed as a breeder producer. Those are two of the major functions, the two major functions that we perform. We breed new varieties and we produce the seed. So then we had both. We had a breeding entity, and then we had the production entity. And then Linda Vista was it became part of PanAmerican Seed. So it became kind of its own separate entity, but all part of the same structure inside the company. And it's really grown from there. The breeding entity moved first to Florida, and then it was eventually moved to Illinois. And so the first breeding station that PanAmerican established on our own, the Florida location, was something that had been there already. But the first one that was built was in Elburn, Illinois. So that was our original breeding station, which is very near to the company, which is based in West Chicago. And so that was in the 60s when that happened. And then the company's just grown through a combination of internal growth and acquisition. We've made a lot of acquisitions of other smaller breeding companies or breeding lines from, we've acquired a breeding line from a vegetable seed company that was doing it on the side. And we've just added to the product line, and we've established additional breeding stations. And now the company has 7 breeding stations all around the world. So we've got 3 in the United States, 1 in Costa Rica, 1 in Holland, and 1 in Denmark. And then we have 4 farms. So we established additional farms in other climates beyond Linda Vista. And so right now we're doing more than 80% of our own production, which is a very different thing. Most flower seed companies do a lot of contract production, and we do some, but we do the lion's share ourselves. And our product line has grown from, I think, when PanAmerican was purchased by Ball in 1962, I think they had maybe 3 or 4 product lines, and now we have 150. So that's how the internal growth has happened, and also the acquiring of new genetics.
And that's actually, if you really think about it, fairly slow growth, over decades and decades, and probably very strategic growth, which is exciting to hear from a company that's been around a long time. I mean, starting in 47, just after World War II, and then, the evolution over the years. But it just strikes me that it hasn't all happened in 2 decades or something like that. It's been a growth that's been over a good period of time, and probably leads to sustained growth, and allowing a company to kind of grow into itself, because going from just a couple breeding stations up to 7 around the world takes a lot of work, a lot of people, and certainly a lot of thought. So it's kind of interesting to hear that history and the growth over that period of time. And I think it also sets the stage, the story of PanAm, 75 years that we're here to celebrate. And I guess bringing it back to a little bit of a personal level, in your career at PanAmerican Seed, what have you seen that supports this growth mentality and the current industry leadership of a company like PanAm? What are some of the factors that you think contribute to that?
One of the things that I think led to a really substantial period of growth and maturity in the company occurred starting in the late 80s and into the 1990s. And I was actually with the company then, so I got to witness all of this happen. And I mentioned that we do almost all of our own seed production at our own controlled farm. So we have the ability to control all the processes, everything from the very first minute you plant a parent plant through to harvesting the seed, and then all the post harvest. And we also have invested quite heavily in all different things to enhance the performance of the seed. So not only to make it easier for growers to handle, but to improve germination, reduce dormancy, things that will improve the uniformity overall. It really, this was all geared toward a goal of having the highest seed quality possible. And at that time, plugs had really come into the industry, and it was becoming a pretty significant part. And the real growth period was during that time. And that really necessitated the need for seed quality, because before that, the ways that growers would sow the seed, they just did broadcast sowing. They would just, take a flat and they would just, pour in the seed by hand, and then they really didn't know how many seeds they sowed, and they didn't know how many actually germinated. So they couldn't really count or track germination. And suddenly with plugs, where you've got a single seed in a single small plant cell, then you can see at a glance what kind of germination performance you're getting. And I think the seed quality in the industry overall was not that great at that time. And there really hadn't been very much effort put into making it uniform to germinate, which is very important to growers now, especially plug growers. And so through making steady, consistent improvements at the farms in every process that we had, really monitoring and measuring, and trying to improve those processes, really investing in the seed enhancement. And then also we put a lot of breeding effort into selecting varieties that would have good germination. And over a period of about a decade, we just slowly built the reputation of seed quality, and PanAmerican became known as being, very, very excellent quality producer and supplier of quality seed, which is, it remains very important to this day. And certainly many others in the industry have put emphasis on it as well, and many have caught up to that standard. But we still really try to push the boundaries and always set a new standard for a class. Like if we can move the germ standard from 85 to 90 or 90 to 95, we try to push that boundary and consistently get the seed quality up. And then I would say if you couple that with really excellent genetics, which we're sort of known for that, people think of us now for the products that we bring to market. But the real thing that I think made the company build a very strong foundation for growth was the effort to develop seed quality. And now we're working on doing that with a very broad range of crops.
And you're right. It's something that I've heard from the first days that I was, was learning about PanAmerican Seed, was seed quality and how that benefits the plug producers and really all the way throughout the industry, because it reduces shrink, it reduces losses, and really takes seed to a very high tech science. And when I learn about the different seed enhancements and how each one has been developed over the years to truly benefit the growers that are using that seed, I know it always reflects back very positively on PanAmerican, and as well as the genetics. Like you said, the varieties that PanAmerican introduces are very thoughtfully produced and released, and tend to solve problems for growers. And it's one of those things that's always keeping the grower in mind whenever I hear a new launch of a product or a process from Pan American Seed. Over the years, and with your in-depth knowledge of Pan American Seed and also the industry as a whole, what is the biggest obstacle or some of the biggest obstacles that you've seen our industry overcome or have seen Pan American's leadership help an industry overcome? And then what have we learned from it? And I guess if you want to also look at the flip side, what are some issues that the industry hasn't figured out yet that we need to work on, or it could hold us back in the future?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I mentioned about germination, the importance of that, and then the quality of the genetics. But another aspect of seed that is extremely important to everyone in the chain in the whole industry is the reliable delivery of that seed. So you can have really high quality seed and you can have a really great product, but if the seed arrives 3 months late from when the grower needs to sow it, it's not helpful. When I started working with PanAmerican Seed back in the HR era, I remember that the various farms that we worked with at that time, some of them were contract and some were our own. They would give us the date of when they were going to deliver the seed. So we would order, 1 million seed of this, and they would tell you, okay, we're going to deliver it after harvest. that was that was the delivery date. So that could literally be anytime. We knew roughly, within a few months when that might be, but that very quickly became not good enough. We as a supplier needed to have better information, and our customers certainly did. And over time, as the big box retail sector has become a more important part of the industry, they're often running ads on certain dates that are advertising certain products, and that product better be in the store, or the grower really has a problem, and then if we haven't delivered the seed, then it's our problem. So that is a very important thing, and it's not as easy to predict that in seed as you might think. There are a lot of factors that can change things. The weather can delay a harvest, it can delay flowering of the plants, it can delay pollen being made in sufficient quantities. There are many things that are difficult to predict, but we've over time, we've built more and more environmental controls into a lot of the greenhouses at our farms to be able to control more of those variables. And we've gotten much better records, and we know better, how long something is going to take. And then we can predict the date that we're supposed to receive the seed, and then we can tell our customers. And we're not perfect at all. I guarantee you every single year we don't deliver some things on time. We don't deliver some things at all. With the number of genetics that we have in our assortment, you're going to have crop failures. There are these biological elements at play. Some of our crops, most of them are F1 hybrids. Some are open pollinated, which means they're grown in fields. We've had things where birds came in and ate a lot of the seed. You can have a windstorm that blows all the plants over. There's all kinds of things you can do that are out of your control, and you don't get the seed. But we have made we, as well as our competitors in the industry, have made a very systematic effort at improving this, and we're much, much better as an industry. Still room to go, but it's way better than it was.
So what that and I think that when you think about how important that is to Pan American's customers, it's clear that that kind of a goal that's been in place since very early on is important and leads to the growth and leadership of the company. I definitely hear each year about some issues, but for the most part, the reliability of seed coming from Pan American is phenomenal, and you always hear about it kind of as an industry standard that a lot of companies are working toward as well. But certainly nothing that Pan American's resting on its laurels. I every year I hear an attention to that, and it's always a corporate goal. So that's exciting. And like you talked about, the improvements in germination and the genetic quality and the reliable delivery all sort of work together to as pieces of the puzzle. So what are some things we haven't figured out yet? I mean, not going to be perfect in some of those things, but what about any other big picture issues that you think our industry really is continues to be challenged with that we need to improve?
Yeah, so I can think of two things that have been sort of challenges, and they both revolve around sustainability.
Mm.
So one of them is that we're seeing more and more pressure from government entities, from environmental groups, just in general, from the industry and consumers to reduce the use of chemicals in production. This is especially pronounced and is more advanced in Europe than it is in North America, but it's already coming. You can see that the trend is going to exist everywhere in the world at some point. One of there are a lot of chemicals such as pesticides and herbicides, and many of those have been really severely restricted or even banned in certain countries. And PGRs is another one that is very commonly used, very necessary for a number of crops. It's something that in Europe, especially, there are very few PGRs that are still allowable. So that's a challenge. If you talk to growers, especially in Europe, they will tell you that they need much more compact plants. And that is an obvious answer. And that could be done in many cases. But the problem is when you make them genetically compact, they're compact and they stay compact. And then you're not going to get that performance that the consumer or the landscaper really needs and wants in a plant. And so trying to find that balance between making products that can be grown sustainably and yet still have that kind of consumer landscape performance that everybody wants is a challenge that everybody, I think many are working on it, but I don't know that anybody's really solved it yet. I know we haven't. We discuss it a lot and we really haven't solved it. And the other one is the industry uses a lot of plastics the whole way through the chain, from plug trays to all the pots and the baskets and the flats. And I know just myself, after I've planted my spring plants, I just have this giant container full of plastic. And there are some options to recycle, but it's not easy for everybody, and not all consumers have access to that. There have been a lot of efforts over the years to come up with a solution to this. I know at Ball we have tried a few different things. I know a number of other companies have tried a number of different strategies. And one of them is a biodegradable pot. But one of the challenges is because it's a live product that you're selling and you have to care for it, you still have to water it. Even if it hasn't sold through at retail yet, you have to still water it. And then it starts to biodegrade on the shelf. And then, the consumer picks it up and it falls apart. And if you make it less biodegradable, then it takes years and years to biodegrade. So that's just an example of something that has been a challenge. I think eventually the industry will solve it, but I think it's a really important one for us to tackle, because I can't imagine there's going to be increasing pressure on all of us to reduce the use of plastics.
I completely agree. I think we are, by nature a green industry, but we do have some pretty glaring challenges that could find their way into the spotlight. Thankfully, we are working on a lot of these things. I know that, nobody really wants to use more chemicals. I think that some of the broad spectrum chemistries that have been introduced, and certainly biologicals and more sustainable, softer options are coming to the forefront right now, which is exciting from many different manufacturers and growers are starting to understand how to use these products. I do think that the future is bright for a lot of the more sustainable approaches. Plastic, on the other hand, seems to be one that we have really not figured out yet. And you're right. At the end of spring, consumers are left with piles of plastic, greenhouses are left with piles of plastic, and there's got to be a solution. And I know that there are companies working on that. That one to me is going to be a much more long-term thing to figure out because yeah, it really could start to make its way into the media, and we'll need to really figure it out quick. But thankfully, there are other countries around the world that are much more sensitive to this issue from all sorts of regulatory reasons, and we are moving in the right direction. But I agree, those are two challenges our industry really needs to really figure out. And I do think also along those lines, there's a lot of research being done, and it's something that some of the new folks coming into our industry are very conscious of and are starting to really make it a priority within some of the university research and corporate research that's going on.